It was just another busy afternoon at a luxury car dealership downtown. Expensive cars lined up outside, their engines purring like hungry beasts. Mechanics in clean blue uniforms joked loudly, their laughter echoing through the air. They didn't notice at first, but then, from the corner of the street, a figure appeared. A man, disheveled, wearing torn clothes, his beard unkempt, and his eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He strolled, almost cautiously, as if every step was a battle. People glanced at him and looked away quickly, as though his very presence was an inconvenience. He stopped right in front of a brand-new Mercedes with its hood open. The engine had a strange knocking sound, and 3 mechanics stood around, scratching their heads. One of them threw his hands up and laughed. "This car's too new. Even we can't figure it out." That's when the homeless man spoke, his voice deep but calm. "Can I fix it for food?" For a moment, silence. Then, laughter exploded. Around him, the mechanics burst out laughing, holding their stomachs. One pointed and shouted, "You, fix this! You don't even look like you've seen a car from the inside." The woman, standing nearby, shook her head in disgust. "Get away from here before you scratch the car," she snapped. But the man didn't move. His tired eyes stayed fixed on the engine, almost as if he could hear its secrets. And what no one knew, what none of them could have ever imagined, was that this homeless stranger was once one of the greatest racing legends the world had ever seen. The dealership's courtyard was buzzing. Expensive cars gleamed under the sun. Sleek black Mercedes, roaring red Ferraris, and polished Bentleys lined up like kings waiting to be admired. Customers in designer suits and elegant dresses strolled around, sipping coffee from porcelain cups. At the same time, salespeople flattered them with fake smiles. It was a world of wealth, privilege, and glittering perfection. And into this world stepped a man who looked like he belonged nowhere. His clothes were worn out, his jacket torn at the seams, his shoes covered in mud and holes. His beard was rough, his hair streaked with gray. He looked like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. People glanced at him the way they'd look at a stain on a white shirt. Quick, dismissive, and uncomfortable. The man's name was Derek Cole. Once upon a time, that name had echoed in stadiums across the world. Racetracks in Monaco, Silverstone, and Daytona had thundered with fans screaming, "Derek! Derek!" He had been a legend on the circuit. Fast, fearless, and unstoppable. Journalists called him the Black Lightning because of the way he cut through the track, leaving his opponents behind like dust. But that was years ago. Now, Derek was just another forgotten man on the street. Life had taken everything from him: fame, fortune, even family. After a tragic accident, a bitter legal battle, and betrayal by those he trusted most, he was left with nothing. He drifted from city to city, living on scraps, surviving on odd jobs, and sometimes just the kindness of strangers. But today, standing in front of that broken-down Mercedes, Derek's instincts stirred again. His sharp ears caught the uneven rhythm of the engine, like a heartbeat out of sync. Where others only heard noise, Derek listened to the exact problem. It was like the car was speaking to him, calling out for help. "Can I fix it for food?" he repeated softly. The mechanics exchanged glances and then burst into another round of laughter. One of them, a tall man with grease-stained hands, sneered, "Listen, old man, you don't even look like you can fix your own shoes, let alone this car." Another mechanic added cruelly, "Why don't you find a trash can to fix? That's more your level." The woman in the beige suit, her name was Melissa Grant, the dealership's senior sales manager, folded her arms and smirked. "This is a $100,000 machine. We don't need a beggar touching it. Leave before I call security." Derek lowered his eyes, but his voice remained steady. "I don't want money, just food. Let me try." The arrogance in their laughter grew louder. The mechanics mimicked him, clutching their stomachs as if his request was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. A few customers passing by stopped to watch, entertained by the cruel show. But Derek didn't flinch. He stood calmly, his eyes scanning the engine with the same intensity he once reserved for race tracks. His mind was already working, calculating, analyzing, solving. He didn't just see wires and pistons. He saw a challenge, the kind of puzzle he was born to conquer, and deep inside, a fire flickered, the fire of the man he used to be. The courtyard was filled with the sound of laughter, echoing off the shiny glass walls of the dealership. The mechanics were enjoying the humiliation far too much. To them, Derek wasn't a man. He was just entertainment, a punchline to break up the boredom of their day. "Hey, old man," one of them called. "You sure you don't want to wash the car instead of fixing it? That's the only job you'd qualify for." Another chimed in. "Careful, guys. He might steal the engine parts and sell them for scraps. Melissa, the sales manager, didn't even hide her disgust. She waved her hand as if shooing away a stray dog. Why are we even wasting time on him? Someone call security and get rid of this nonsense. But before anyone could move, Derek slowly stepped closer to the Mercedes. His eyes were sharp, scanning every detail, every connection, every sound of the misfiring engine. He didn't need tools yet. Just his ears and his instincts. You replaced the spark plugs 2 weeks ago, Derek said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. The laughter froze. The head mechanic frowned. How the hell would you know that? Derek pointed at the slight discoloration near the plug wires. Because the wear pattern isn't natural. Whoever installed them didn't torque them properly. That's why the engine misfires when the RPM goes above 2,000. If you don't fix it now, you'll blow the catalytic converter within the month. The mechanics exchanged glances. The customers watching began to murmur. For a moment, silence replaced the laughter. Then, as if to recover their pride, the head mechanic burst out laughing again. Oh, so now you're some expert. What are you, Professor of Trash Cans? Get out of here before I... But Melissa interrupted. Her tone was sharper now, less amused. Wait, how did he know about the plugs? The mechanic shrugged uncomfortably. Lucky guess. Derek's lips curled into a faint smile. Luck has nothing to do with engines. For a brief second, the fire in his eyes returned and Melissa noticed it. Something about the way he spoke, the way he knew, it unsettled her. But instead of admitting it, she folded her arms tighter. Fine, if you're so sure, prove it. Please fix it. But if you fail, you're leaving this lot, and you're never setting foot here again. The mechanics grinned cruelly. They loved the idea of watching him fail in front of everyone. Derek nodded. Deal. A small crowd gathered. Customers, sales staff, even a few kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, all curious to see what the ragged homeless man would do with a car worth more than most houses. Derek walked toward the open hood. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from hunger. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and his body was weak. Still, the moment his fingers brushed against the cool metal of the engine, something inside him awoke. It was like shaking hands with an old friend. He closed his eyes, listening. The ticking, the uneven combustion, the faint vibration beneath the hood, it was all speaking to him. He grabbed a small wrench lying nearby. You're tightening them wrong, Derek said softly. Clockwise pressure first, then a quarter back. That's how you balance it. The head mechanic scoffed. That's nonsense. But within minutes, Derek's steady hands adjusted the plugs with precision. He cleaned the connections using nothing but an old rag from his pocket. Then he leaned back, started. The mechanic rolled his eyes but turned the key. The engine roared to life. Smooth, powerful, flawless. The rattling and coughing were gone. The Mercedes purred like a beast finally unleashed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The customers stared in disbelief. The mechanics froze, their smug expressions wiped clean. Even Melissa, for the first time, looked genuinely stunned. Derek wiped his hands on his rag and whispered, "Engines don't lie." But instead of applause, more insults followed. The head mechanic snapped, his pride wounded. So what? You fixed one car. Big deal. That doesn't change what you are. You're still a nobody. Melissa smirked again, regaining her cold composure. Congratulations. You just worked for free, but don't think this earns you anything. A single trick doesn't make you special. Derek's stomach growled audibly. He lowered his head. I just asked for food. For a moment, there was silence, but instead of kindness, laughter erupted again. The mechanics mocked him. Give him leftovers from the trash. Yeah, maybe a dog bone. Careful, he might choke on luxury. The crowd laughed too, some nervously, some cruelly. The humiliation was deeper than hunger. Derek clenched his fists not out of anger, but to hold back the memories flooding his mind. Memories of standing on podiums, gold medals around his neck, champagne spraying in victory. Memories of people cheering his name. Memories of a time when he was respected, admired, unstoppable. Now, those same people would cross the street to avoid him. Melissa leaned closer, her voice low, dripping with arrogance. Here's a deal. If you're as smart as you claim, prove it again. Another car, something harder. If you succeed, maybe I'll buy you dinner. If you fail, you crawl back to the gutter where you came from. The mechanics cheered at the challenge. The crowd leaned in, eager for more drama. Derek took a deep breath. His eyes darkened, not with fear, but with determination. For him, this wasn't just about food anymore. It was about dignity, about reminding the world who he was. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The dealership buzzed like a theater before the second act. Customers leaned closer, eager to see whether the ragged stranger would humiliate himself or shock them again. Melissa, with her arms crossed and a mocking smile plastered on her face, raised her chin toward another car parked nearby, a sleek, jet-black Ferrari 488. "All right, genius," she said coldly. "If you're so capable, fix that," the crowd murmured. Everyone knew the Ferrari wasn't just any car. It was a beast of engineering, complicated even for experienced mechanics. Only certified specialists usually touch it. The head mechanic grinned wickedly. "Yeah, let's see him touch that beauty. If he ruins it, we'll have the perfect excuse to throw him out, and maybe even call the cops." Derek walked toward the Ferrari. His steps were slow, deliberate, like a soldier heading into battle. His fingers brushed the smooth surface of the car, tracing its curves. For a moment, he closed his eyes, listening, not to the laughter or the insults, but to the silent voice of the machine. "Start it," Derek said calmly. The mechanic snorted, but obeyed. The Ferrari roared, but the engine sound was uneven, something small, something subtle. To an ordinary ear, it would have gone unnoticed. To Derek, it was like a scream in the middle of silence. "Stop," Derek ordered. He crouched, checking the alignment near the intake valves, sniffing faintly at the exhaust. "Your fuel injectors aren't balanced. Cylinder 3 is running lean. Keep driving like this and you'll warp the piston head within weeks." The mechanic's jaw tightened. He knew Derek was right. He had noticed the issue himself last week, but hadn't figured out the cause. Melissa arched an eyebrow. "Talk is cheap. Fix it." The tools were handed reluctantly, as if touching them with Derek's hands would contaminate them. He didn't complain. His movements were fluid, confident. Within minutes, he balanced the injectors, cleaned the lines, and realigned the sensors like a man playing a familiar instrument. "Start it again." The Ferrari purred. Smooth, perfect. The crowd gasped in disbelief. A little boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, how did he know that?" The father shook his head, whispering, "I don't know, but he's good." Derek stood, wiping his hands. His stomach growled again, louder this time, echoing in the silence. The humiliation cut deeper. Now, he had fixed 2 cars worth more than millions combined, and yet not a single bite of food had touched his lips. Melissa tilted her head, her smile thin and poisonous. "Not bad for a beggar, but tell me, do you expect applause? You fixed cars, not lives. You're still nothing." The mechanics laughed harder, emboldened by her cruelty. Maybe he used to be a janitor in a garage, or maybe he watched YouTube videos under a bridge. But amidst the laughter, one older customer, a man in a navy blue suit with silver hair, watched Derek closely. His eyes narrowed, recognition flickering like a spark. He whispered to himself, "No, it can't be. That's not possible." He remembered that stance, the precision, the confidence. But before he could speak, Melissa interrupted his thoughts. "Enough of this circus," she declared loudly. "You've had your fun. Now leave." Derek's gaze fell, but his jaw tightened. He wasn't finished, not yet. He looked up slowly, his voice steady but heavy with quiet authority. "Give me one more car." The crowd went silent. Melissa smirked. "One more? Why should we?" "Because," Derek said, his eyes burning with quiet fire, "I'll show you something none of you will forget." The arrogance drained slightly from Melissa's smile. Something about his tone unsettled her again. The old customer in the navy suit leaned closer, anticipation in his eyes. Melissa snapped her fingers toward a silver Aston Martin parked in the corner. "Fine, that one. If you fail, you crawl out of here. If you succeed, maybe you'll get your little dinner." The crowd leaned in again, holding their breath. This wasn't just about cars anymore. There was something different about the way Derek moved, the way he spoke. One whisper spread through the spectators. "Who is he?" The silver Aston Martin gleamed under the afternoon sun, its presence commanding respect even among the luxury cars lined beside it. Melissa's lips curved into a mocking smile as she gestured toward it. "Go ahead, hero. Let's see if your magic touch works again. Or maybe the third time will expose you for what you are, a fraud." The crowd chuckled, the mechanics smirking, like wolves circling prey. But Derek didn't flinch. He walked toward the Aston Martin with the slow, steady confidence of a man who'd faced bigger battles than ridicule. His hand glided across the hood, and for a moment he stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. The air grew tense. Even the laughter faded slightly as people watched, transfixed. "Start it," Derek said softly. The mechanic turned the ignition. The engine roared alive, but there was a faint grinding noise beneath the growl, almost unnoticeable. To the untrained ear, it was nothing. To Derek, it was a siren. "Shut it down," Derek ordered firmly. Melissa rolled her eyes. "What now? Another miracle diagnosis?" Derek crouched, his hand brushing the underside, listening, feeling. "Your transmission's about to seize. Gear ratios are off because the differential alignment is cracked. Whoever serviced this last made a critical mistake. Drive it like this, and you'll wreck the gearbox." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mechanic frowned, his face paling. He had just replaced parts on this car last week. Melissa scoffed. "Prove it." Derek didn't ask for tools. Instead, he grabbed a single socket wrench from the nearby stand, his hands steady, his movements precise. Within minutes, he exposed the fault, a misaligned differential pin, dangerously close to snapping. He adjusted it with a precision that spoke not of practice, but mastery. When the mechanic restarted the car, the engine hummed like silk, perfect, flawless, reborn. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, applause. Not everyone. Not yet. But a few customers began clapping, astonished by what they had just witnessed. Even the children watching beamed with excitement, pointing at Derek like he was a superhero. Melissa's smirk faltered. She tried to recover her arrogance, but her voice wavered. "So, you fixed 3 cars. Big deal. That still doesn't make you someone." It was then that the older man in the navy suit finally stepped forward. His voice boomed across the courtyard. "Are you all blind? Do you not know who this man is?" The crowd turned, stunned. Melissa blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" The older man's hands trembled slightly as he pointed at Derek. "That's Derek Cole, the Black Lightning." The words struck like thunder. Murmurs erupted instantly. "No, it can't be. Wait, Derek Cole? The racer? I thought he died years ago." Melissa's face drained of color. The name echoed in her memory. Derek Cole, the racing legend, the man who had dominated circuits across Europe and America. His victories had been the stuff of headlines. His crashes, his comebacks, legendary. Derek lifted his head, his eyes glistening, not with pride, but with pain. "That man," the old customer continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "was the fastest driver this country has ever seen. He won titles that others could only dream of. He broke barriers when the world tried to hold him back. He inspired millions. And you," he turned sharply toward Melissa and the mechanics, "you mocked him for food." The crowd gasped, shame spreading like wildfire. The mechanics' smug grins evaporated. Melissa stuttered, unable to form words. Derek's voice finally broke the silence. It was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of his story. "I didn't come here for recognition. I didn't come here for pity. I came here because I was hungry, because I needed one meal to keep going. And in return, you gave me laughter, insults, humiliation." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the silent crowd. "But cars never lie. They don't judge your skin. They don't mock your past. They tell you what they need. And I listen." Tears welled in the eyes of some spectators. The children looked up at him with awe. The older man stepped closer, placing a hand on Derek's shoulder. "You deserve more than this. You always did." For the first time that day, Derek's hardened expression softened. But before he could speak, Melissa, red-faced and trembling, tried one last defense. He's lying. This is some trick, a washed-up drunk pretending to be a legend." The older man cut her off sharply. "Enough. I saw him race. I saw him break records. And no one can deny the hands of a master when they see them at work." The crowd erupted in whispers, many of them now glaring at Melissa with disgust. She had mocked a hero. Derek stood tall, not with arrogance, but with dignity reclaimed. For the first time in years, the fire in his eyes burned bright again. The dealership courtyard was no longer filled with laughter. Instead, silence hung heavy in the air, silence mixed with shame, awe, and disbelief. People who had mocked Derek moments ago now avoided his eyes, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Melissa's arms, once confidently crossed, now dangled awkwardly at her sides. The smirk she wore so proudly had vanished entirely. The mechanics shifted uncomfortably, their pride shattered. The older man in the navy suit spoke again, his voice calm but commanding. "This man deserves respect. Not mockery, not cruelty. Respect." A customer, a woman who had laughed earlier, stepped forward timidly. I'm sorry, sir. We didn't know. Derek's eyes softened, though his voice carried no bitterness. You didn't need to know my past to treat me with decency. A hungry man doesn't lose his dignity because he asks for food. Respect should never depend on someone's clothes, wallet, or status. The words pierced deeper than any engine roar. Heads bowed. Even children understood the lesson that adults had failed to live by. Melissa tried to speak, her voice cracking. I didn't mean, Derek interrupted gently but firmly. You meant every word. And that's the truth you'll have to live with. The older man placed a hand in his pocket and pulled out a small business card, handing it to Derek. I run a restoration garage, not just for ordinary cars, for classics, legends. If you ever want to work, my door is open. The crowd gasped softly. A lifeline, an opportunity, offered not out of pity, but recognition. Derek looked at the card for a long moment. His eyes misted. Slowly, he nodded, whispering, "Thank you." But then his gaze turned back to the people. I don't need applause. I don't need charity. What I want you to remember is this. Behind every face you mock, there's a story you don't know. Behind every broken man, there may be a champion who once inspired thousands. Treat people as humans first, because respect is the only fuel that never runs out. The courtyard, once a stage for cruelty, now erupted into genuine applause. Customers clapped, children cheered, and even some mechanics lowered their heads in humility. Melissa, red with shame, stepped back into the shadows, her arrogance crumbling in the weight of her guilt. For the first time, she realized that her laughter had exposed not Derek's weakness, but her own. The older man guided Derek toward the dealership's cafe. "Let's get you that meal, son." And as Derek sat down, breaking bread for the first time in days, a quiet smile crossed his face. Not because he was finally fed, but because, just for a moment, the world had remembered who he was. Not a beggar, not a homeless man, but Derek Cole, the Black Lightning, a legend who still carried the fire of dignity no matter how life tried to extinguish it. Respect costs nothing, but it gives everything. Never judge a person by their appearance because the soul inside might hold more greatness than you could ever imagine.